On Christmas morning, the house smelled like cinnamon, pine needles, and something darker I couldn't quite name. My daughter stood in front of me, smiling too hard, holding a delicate porcelain cup with both hands. "Mom," she said softly, "drink this special tea I made just for you." Her voice sounded sweet, loving, but her eyes didn't. I noticed how her fingers trembled, how her husband hovered in the doorway, pretending to scroll on his phone, watching us through the reflection of the window. How no one else in the room was talking. Years of motherhood teach you many things. One of them is this: when love feels rehearsed, it's no longer love. So I smiled back, thanked her, and when no one was looking, I casually switched cups with her husband's. 30 minutes later, the Christmas music stopped. The ornaments reflected panic instead of joy. And my daughter began screaming my name, not in anger, not in hatred, but in terror. Because the tea was never meant for him. Christmas had always been my holiday. Not because of the gifts or the music or even the food, but because it was the one day every year when I could still pretend my family was whole. I raised my daughter mostly on my own. Her father left when she was 9, not with shouting or slammed doors, but with silence. One morning his side of the closet was empty, and by evening, so was his place in our lives. From that day on, it was just the two of us. I worked long hours, skipped vacations, learned to stretch meals and smiles. I learned how to be strong in front of her and tired only when she was asleep. She used to call me her best friend. She used to sit on the kitchen counter while I cooked and tell me everything: school gossip, silly crushes, impossible dreams. I believed that bond was unbreakable. I believed love, once earned through sacrifice, was permanent. I was wrong. Things began to change after she married Daniel. At first, I told myself it was normal. A new husband, a new life. Of course, she had less time for her mother. But then the phone calls shortened. The warmth cooled. The laughter became polite. When I visited, Daniel always found a reason to correct me. How I folded towels, how I spoke, even how I laughed. Always with a smile. Always subtle enough that I sounded crazy if I pointed it out. The first time I noticed my daughter siding with him, it felt like a small cut. The 10th time, it felt intentional. By last Christmas, she no longer hugged me when I arrived. This year, she insisted I stay with them for the holidays. Said it would mean a lot. Said we needed to feel like a real family again. That should have made me happy. Instead, it made my stomach tighten. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, the questions started. Casual questions. Dangerous ones. "Mom, do you still have that old life insurance policy? Did you ever update your will?" You should really think about simplifying things just in case. Just in case of what? She never said. Daniel asked his own questions. About my medications. About my blood pressure. About what herbs I was allergic to. He framed it as concern. He always did. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe my daughter was still the girl who used to leave notes in my lunch bag that said, "I love you forever." By Christmas morning, the house was decorated perfectly. Too perfectly. Every ornament in place. Every smile practiced. Every movement measured. That was when my daughter walked toward me with the cup of tea. And everything I had been refusing to see finally stood right in front of me. The tea wasn't the first strange thing that morning. It was just the clearest. From the moment I woke up in the guest room, something felt staged, like I had stepped onto a set where everyone knew their lines except me. The hallway light was already on, though it was barely dawn. I heard whispered voices downstairs, stopping abruptly when my footsteps creaked on the stairs. My daughter turned too quickly when she saw me. Daniel smiled a second too late. "Did you sleep well, Mom?" she asked, already busying herself with the kettle, not waiting for an answer. I watched them move around the kitchen, careful not to touch each other, careful not to touch me either. Daniel kept checking his watch. My daughter kept glancing at her phone. No Christmas music yet. No autumns. Just anticipation, tight and coiled. When I reached for my coat, she stopped me. "You don't need that today," she said. "We're staying in. I want you here all day." There it was again. That insistence. Not please. Not if you'd like. A decision already made for me. As we sat at the table, Daniel casually brought up my health. Asked if I was still taking my evening pills. Asked if my doctor had changed the dosage. I answered vaguely. He nodded like he was filing the information away. Then came the money. Not directly. Never directly. He talked about rising costs. About how unpredictable life was. About how people never plan well enough for emergencies. My daughter joined in, nodding, adding little comments about how complicated things can get when someone gets sick. I noticed something else then. Neither of them had poured themselves anything to drink. The kettle boiled. My daughter poured the tea into 2 cups. One for me. One for Daniel. She placed mine closer. His farther away. Then she didn't sit. Instead, she watched. That's when I remembered all the little things I had ignored over the past few months. The documents Daniel once asked me to sign, just to look over. The time my daughter suggested I move some savings into a joint account for convenience. The way she once joked, laughed too hard about how expensive funerals were. I had laughed with her then. I didn't laugh now. I studied the tea. The smell was strong. Bitter. Not like anything she used to make me when I visited. And yet, she didn't drink any. Neither did Daniel. Go on, she said softly. It'll help you relax. That was when my instincts, quiet for years, dulled by love and denial, finally screamed. I realized then that this wasn't about tea. It wasn't about Christmas. It wasn't even about resentment. It was about control. And in that moment, as I lifted the cup, I understood something terrifying and clarifying all at once. They thought I was weak. They thought age had made me slow. They thought motherhood had made me blind. They had forgotten something. Before I was her mother, I was a woman who survived abandonment, poverty, and loneliness. I was a woman who learned to read silence the way others read words. So I smiled, and I made my choice. I lifted the cup with steady hands. Even though my pulse was pounding so loudly, I was sure they could hear it. The steam brushed my face, carrying that bitter, unfamiliar scent. My daughter leaned forward slightly, pretending to straighten a napkin, her eyes never leaving the cup. Careful, she said. It's hot. Concern. Or instruction. I took a small step toward the counter, as if to add sugar. My daughter nodded quickly, relieved. Daniel shifted in his chair, finally reaching for his own cup, as if on cue. That was the moment. I set my cup down beside the sugar bowl, my back half-turned. Daniel stood too, moving closer, distracted by his phone vibrating in his hand. No one was watching my hands anymore, only my face. I slid the cups, smooth and silent, switching their places like it was the most natural thing in the world. Years of practice had taught me how to move without being noticed. You don't raise a child alone without learning that skill. I stirred the cup now in front of me. The wrong cup. Daniel lifted his. Took a cautious sip. Then another. My daughter finally relaxed, reaching for a plate of pastries she had barely touched all morning. See, she said lightly. Nothing strange about it. I nodded, brought the cup to my lips, and pretended to drink. The minutes that followed felt unreal, stretched thin, and fragile like glass. We talked about nothing. The weather. A neighbor's new car. Old Christmas stories that suddenly felt borrowed from another life. At first, nothing happened. Then Daniel's voice faltered mid-sentence. He pressed his palm flat against the table, blinking hard. Sweat appeared along his hairline, darkening the edges of his smile. You okay? My daughter asked too quickly. Daniel stood, then sat back down, confused by his own body. His breathing changed shorter, uneven. His fingers began to tremble, rattling the spoon against the cup. I watched quietly. 30 minutes after the tea was poured, the Christmas music cut off in the middle of a song. Daniel's chair scraped loudly as he collapsed to his knees, gasping, eyes wide with panic. My daughter screamed. Not for help at first. For me. Mom, she cried, her voice breaking apart. Mom, what's happening? I didn't move. I didn't shout. I didn't rush to him. I simply set the cup down on the table, untouched. And for the first time that morning, My daughter looked at me not as someone she could manage or persuade or sacrifice. She looked at me with fear. Because in that instant, she understood exactly what she had done. And she understood something else too. I was no longer the woman she thought she could get rid of. The room erupted into chaos. My daughter dropped to the floor beside Daniel, her hands shaking as she tried to steady his shoulders. His breathing was ragged now, shallow pulls of air like he was drowning on dry land. His lips had lost their color. His eyes darted wildly, searching for something, someone to blame. "Call an ambulance," she screamed, fumbling for her phone. I stayed where I was. Not frozen. Not shocked. Just still. The sound of sirens came quickly. Too quickly for something accidental. Paramedics flooded the house, pushing past Christmas decorations that now looked grotesque in their cheer. Questions were fired into the air. What did he eat? What did he drink? Any known conditions? My daughter answered too much. Too fast. Her words tripped over each other, tangled in panic. "It was just tea," she kept saying. "Usted." One of the paramedics turned to me. "Ma'am, did you drink it too?" I met his eyes.
Calm. Clear.
"No," I said. "I didn't." At the hospital, everything unraveled. Blood tests. Toxicology screens. Doctors whispering behind glass walls. Police officers quietly taking notes. Daniel survived, but barely. Whatever had been in that tea wasn't meant to kill quickly. It was meant to weaken, disorient, make an existing condition look natural. But there was one problem. It wasn't his condition. It was mine. The tea had been prepared based on my medical history, my prescriptions, my vulnerabilities. Every question Daniel had asked suddenly made sense. They hadn't been checking on me. They had been preparing for my absence. When the truth surfaced, my daughter didn't scream anymore.
She cried.
In a small white room, with no decorations and no witnesses, she finally looked at me the way she used to when she was little, caught, afraid, and desperate for forgiveness. "I didn't think it would go this far," she whispered. "He said it would just make you sick. That everything would be easier after." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reach for her hand. "I know," I said. "That's why I switched the cups." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Later, after statements were signed and evidence collected, I went home alone. The Christmas tree was still lit. One ornament lay shattered on the floor, reflecting my face in broken pieces. I cleaned it up carefully, because some messes, once revealed, don't need rage. They need truth, and sometimes survival is the quietest form of revenge. What no one understood, not the police, not the doctors, not even my daughter, was that Christmas morning was not the beginning. It was the end. Weeks before the holiday, I had already felt the shift. A mother knows when love turns into calculation. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. A pause before a hug. A question asked twice. A concern that arrives too rehearsed. The first thing I did was stop talking. I answered questions vaguely. I changed small details about my health. I mentioned medications I no longer took. I let Daniel believe he was clever. I let my daughter believe I was tired, distracted, slipping. Then I started preparing. I scheduled a routine appointment with my doctor and told him everything. Not emotionally, logically. The questions, the pressure, the insistence on knowing my vulnerabilities. He listened longer than I expected, ran extra tests, documented everything. After that, I met with a lawyer. Quietly, I updated my will, moved assets, created barriers that could not be crossed quickly or cleanly. I made sure that if anything happened to me, nothing would go where they expected it to go. And finally, I watched. I watched my daughter rehearse concern. I watched Daniel take notes without writing them down. I watched them grow impatient as Christmas approached. By the time my daughter offered me that cup of tea, I already knew it wasn't meant to comfort me. It was meant to remove me. The switch wasn't impulse. It was confirmation. At the hospital, when the police asked if I believed the poisoning was intentional, I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. "And I can prove it." I handed them everything. The medical records. The messages. The questions Daniel had asked. The timeline. Even the herbs found in the kitchen, chosen carefully, based on my body, not his. My daughter never looked at me the same after that. Not with anger. Not with hatred. With the hollow understanding that she had underestimated the one person who knew her best. I didn't lose a daughter that Christmas. I lost the illusion that motherhood protects you from betrayal. And I gained something far more dangerous to those who tried to erase me.
Clarity.
The case didn't move quickly. These things never do. But it moved steadily. Daniel was charged first. Conspiracy. Attempted poisoning. Financial fraud layered beneath it all like rot under polished wood. He tried to deny everything at the beginning, blamed stress, blamed misunderstandings, blamed me, said I was paranoid, unstable, dramatic. That defense collapsed the moment the evidence was laid out. The herb mixture matched my medical file precisely. The questions he'd asked lined up in order. The financial transfers he'd attempted weeks earlier told a story even he couldn't explain away. My daughter was charged later. Not as harshly. Not as visibly. But charged nonetheless. She cried in court. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that draws sympathy. People whispered that she was manipulated. That she was weak. That she made a mistake out of love. They weren't wrong. But they weren't right either. Love doesn't ask you to erase your mother. I was asked more than once if I wanted leniency for her. If I wanted to speak on her behalf. If I wanted to remember that she was still my child. I said no. Not out of cruelty. Out of truth. Because protecting her from consequences would have meant sacrificing myself all over again. And I was done teaching her that lesson. When it was over, I went back to my house. The same one she once wanted to inherit early. I took down the Christmas tree slowly, ornament by ornament. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt finished. Finished pretending. Finished excusing. Finished believing that motherhood means self-destruction. Sometimes people ask me if I regret switching the cups. I tell them this. I didn't switch cups to punish anyone. I switched them to survive. And survival, when done quietly and completely, is the most powerful ending there is. Because I am still here. And those who tried to remove me will spend the rest of their lives remembering that I was never as weak as they needed me to be.